In a significant development amidst the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing have resumed following a crucial agreement reached between Ukrainian and American officials. The discussions held in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia resulted in a proposed 30-day ceasefire contingent upon Russia's acceptance. This ceasefire proposal has sparked cautious optimism among Western allies as it represents a potential turning point in the protracted conflict that has devastated Ukraine since 2022. On March 11, 2025, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized the urgency of the situation, stating, "The ball is now in Russia's court." The agreement aims for a halt to combat operations along the entire front line, along with a moratorium on long-range missile and drone strikes. This ceasefire is not only intended as a respite for both sides but also as an opportunity for Ukraine to regroup and potentially negotiate a more lasting peace arrangement. The U.S. has also lifted its suspension on military aid, which had been a point of contention in recent months. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed gratitude for the resumed support, noting it as a very positive development. However, he highlighted that the effectiveness of the ceasefire depends on Russia's willingness to engage constructively. "Everything depends on whether Russia is willing to install a truce or continue killing people," Zelensky stated. The backdrop to these diplomatic efforts is a grim reality on the ground. On the same day as the ceasefire announcement, a Russian missile strike in Kryvyi Rih claimed the life of one individual and injured several others. Additionally, Russian forces have reportedly made significant advances in the Kursk region, sparking fears that any pause in hostilities might allow them to consolidate their gains. Russian officials have been non-committal regarding the ceasefire, with Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov indicating that Russia is still evaluating the proposal. The potential for renewed aggression looms large, with U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz warning that the resumption of military aid is intended to ensure Ukraine has the means to deter future attacks. "Every country in the world has a right to defend itself," Waltz said, reinforcing the U.S. commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The stakes are particularly high as Russia grapples with its own internal pressures. Russian ultranationalist elements have publicly dismissed the ceasefire proposal, arguing that it could enable Ukraine to rearm and regroup. This internal dissent within Russia complicates the Kremlin's response, as it must balance domestic expectations with the need for diplomatic engagement. Internationally, the response has been largely supportive of Ukraine. European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, have urged Russia to accept the ceasefire unconditionally. Macron stated the first guarantee of security remains the Ukrainian army, highlighting the importance of a robust military presence as a deterrent against further Russian aggression. As the world watches the unfolding situation, the potential for a diplomatic resolution remains fraught with uncertainty. With the ceasefire proposal now on the table, both sides face critical decisions that could shape the future of the conflict. The coming days will be pivotal, and the responses from Moscow will be closely scrutinized, not only for their immediate impact but also for their implications on the long-term trajectory of U.S.-Russia relations and the ongoing war in Ukraine. In summary, the recent developments signal a temporary pause in hostilities, but the path to lasting peace is laden with challenges. The international community remains vigilant, hopeful that this moment might lead to a more stable and secure future for Ukraine. In a critical development in the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, the United States and Ukraine have jointly proposed a 30-day ceasefire contingent upon Russia's agreement. This announcement, made on March 11, 2025 during bilateral talks in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, marks a significant diplomatic effort as both nations seek to halt hostilities and pave the way for a broader peace agreement. The ceasefire initiative comes alongside the resumption of U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which had been paused amid previous tensions. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized the urgency of the ceasefire, stating, "The ball is now in Russia's court." He clarified that the U.S. would reach out to Russia through multiple diplomatic channels to communicate the proposal, underlining the expectation for a swift response. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed cautious optimism about the ceasefire, specifying that it would entail an end to combat operations along the entire front line, including a cessation of missile strikes and naval operations in the Black Sea. However, he also conveyed skepticism regarding Russia's intentions, asserting none of us trust the Russians, and indicating that any agreement would require substantive guarantees of compliance from Moscow. Despite the potential for peace talks, Russian responses have been largely negative. Russian ultranationalist figures, including members of the State Duma, have outright rejected the ceasefire, interpreting it as a strategic maneuver that would allow Ukraine to regroup and rearm. The Kremlin has remained non-committal, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov indicating that Russia would not make a decision until it is fully briefed on the details of the U.S.-Ukraine discussions. As the diplomatic landscape evolves, the military situation on the ground remains volatile. Reports indicate that Russian forces have made significant territorial gains in Kursk Oblast, with evidence of advancing troops and the recapture of key settlements. Ukrainian forces, while under pressure, have launched drone strikes targeting infrastructure in Moscow, reflecting a shift in operational focus as they aim to disrupt Russian military logistics. The international community has demonstrated support for the ceasefire proposal, with leaders from France, the UK, and other European nations expressing backing, while emphasizing the need for Russia to respond positively. French President Emmanuel Macron highlighted the importance of establishing credible security guarantees for Ukraine, a sentiment echoed by military officials from various allied nations who met to discuss ongoing support for Ukraine's defense capabilities. In parallel, the U.S. administration has signaled that any peace agreement may necessitate territorial concessions from Ukraine, a point that has raised concerns among Ukrainian officials about the long-term implications of such negotiations. As both sides prepare for what could be a pivotal moment in the conflict, the overarching question remains: will Russia accept the ceasefire? Or will military hostilities escalate further? The coming days will be critical as the U.S. engages with Russia and as the world watches the unfolding dynamics of this complex geopolitical crisis. While the ceasefire could provide a much-needed respite for civilians and military personnel alike, the potential for renewed hostilities looms large, underscoring the fragile nature of peace in this war-torn region. In a dramatic turn of events, U.S. President Donald Trump has thrown down the gauntlet to Russian President Vladimir Putin, challenging him to agree to a ceasefire in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine. This bold move comes in the wake of a significant diplomatic push by the United States and Ukraine, which culminated in an agreement for a month-long ceasefire during talks in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The stakes are high, as the outcome of these negotiations could shape the future of the region and influence global geopolitical dynamics. Trump, speaking from Kyiv, stated that a peace deal is now up to Russia. However, insiders from Moscow have indicated that securing an agreement may prove challenging for Putin, who reportedly finds the terms of the proposed ceasefire difficult to accept. According to sources, Russia would need to negotiate the specifics of the ceasefire and seek security guarantees to feel comfortable moving forward. This reflects the complexity of the situation as Russia continues to make territorial advances. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed deep skepticism regarding Russia's trustworthiness. "I have no trust in Russia," he emphasized, underscoring the historical context of broken agreements and ongoing hostilities. Zelensky's remarks come as Ukraine officially supports the Trump administration's renewed efforts for peace, viewing the restoration of U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing as crucial for the country's defense. The diplomatic efforts gained momentum following a chaotic episode where Trump previously cut off military support after a contentious exchange with Zelensky. Since then, the U.S. has resumed its commitment to Ukraine, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio confirming that discussions about the ceasefire with Russia are set to take place shortly. As the situation develops, the international community watches closely. Defense ministers from several European nations, including France, Germany, Italy, and Poland, gathered to discuss a new security architecture for Ukraine, indicating a broader regional concern regarding the conflict's implications. French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu announced that about 15 countries are interested in participating in discussions aimed at reinforcing Ukraine's security posture. On the ground, the mood among Ukrainian soldiers remains cautious. A drone squad leader in the Donbass region expressed concerns about the ceasefire's conditions, questioning whether it would compel Ukraine to concede territory. "We will never trust Russia to respect a ceasefire," he declared, equating the ongoing conflict to a boxing match that, despite exhaustion, must continue until a decisive conclusion is reached. As U.S. officials prepare to engage with Russia, speculation grows about the potential outcomes of these negotiations. President Trump has made it clear that American representatives are already in motion, hoping to persuade Russia to accept the ceasefire. Yet the Russian response remains guarded, with Kremlin sources indicating that they will not comment on the ceasefire until they have spoken directly with U.S. representatives. In the coming days, the world will be watching closely to see if these diplomatic overtures yield a meaningful breakthrough or if the conflict will continue to escalate. The willingness of both sides to navigate this complex landscape will ultimately determine the fate of the region and the broader implications for international relations. As tensions persist, the call for a genuine and lasting peace grows ever more urgent. The path toward a potential ceasefire in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine has taken a pivotal turn following recent discussions in Saudi Arabia. Ukrainian officials have stated that the decision now rests firmly in Moscow's hands, emphasizing the need for Russia's acceptance of a proposed 30-day ceasefire. This development comes amid a backdrop of shifting political dynamics and military strategies, particularly with the return of Donald Trump to the U.S. presidency, which has altered the landscape for Ukraine's foreign relations. Andriy Yermak, head of President Volodymyr Zelensky's office, was part of the Ukrainian delegation that met with U.S. representatives in Jeddah on March 11. Both parties reached a tentative agreement to pursue a ceasefire, which Yermak characterized as a necessary step towards establishing security guarantees and preparing for a comprehensive peace agreement. "The whole world will see who really wants to end the war and who is simply playing for time," Yermak asserted, making it clear that the onus is now on Russia. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov responded cautiously, indicating that Russia needed more details before making a decision, reflecting the Kremlin's tendency to approach negotiations with skepticism. "We don't want to get ahead of ourselves," Peskov stated, hinting at the possibility of further discussions between Washington and Moscow. The backdrop to these negotiations is fraught with complexity. Trump's return to power has shifted the United States' approach towards Ukraine, with some observers noting a stark departure from the previous administration's stance. Trump has been accused of echoing Russian narratives, which has raised concerns within Ukraine about the reliability of U.S. support. Notably, Trump recently announced a freeze on military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, a decision that has now been reversed following the Jeddah talks. During a press conference, Zelensky expressed optimism regarding the ceasefire proposal, urging the U.S. to convince Russia to accept it. "Ukraine is ready for peace," he stated, emphasizing that the real test lies with Russia's willingness to cease hostilities. This sentiment was echoed in his remarks about security guarantees, which he suggested could be finalized if a ceasefire is enacted. Trump, meanwhile, underscored the urgency of a ceasefire, alluding to the potential for severe consequences if Russia does not comply. "There are things you could do that wouldn't be pleasant in a financial sense," he remarked, suggesting the U.S. could exert substantial pressure on Russia if necessary. However, he expressed a desire to avoid such measures, citing the need for peace. As the situation unfolds, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized that the next steps hinge on Russia's response. "The ball is truly in their court," he remarked, indicating Washington's intention to explore multiple channels of communication with Moscow in the hopes of facilitating a resolution. Despite the hopeful discussions in Saudi Arabia, fierce combat continues along the front lines, particularly in the western Russian Kursk region. Ukrainian forces have reported ongoing drone attacks and missile strikes, highlighting the volatile nature of the conflict even as diplomatic efforts are underway. The international community watches closely as this ceasefire proposal develops, recognizing the profound implications for regional stability and geopolitical balance. Analysts suggest that any meaningful progress will require not only a commitment from Russia but also robust security assurances for Ukraine from its allies. As both sides grapple with the realities of war and the complexities of diplomacy, the coming weeks will be critical in determining whether a lasting peace can be achieved. The focus now shifts to Moscow as the world awaits its response to this pivotal diplomatic overture.